She goes, "What's wrong?" And I was like, and I pointed at her, I was like, "Are you into witchcraft?" And she goes, "Well, I've dabbled in it." I was in one day and she's like, "Hey, I'm ready to do something completely different." And I was like, "Okay, well, to most people, to most hairdressers, doing something different is like, we're going to put some lights in their hair. But she wanted me to completely shave the sides of her head and do like a pompadour.
Those were just a few of the haunting revelations made by Lisa Dykes' own hairdresser during her murder trial. In 2020, during the peak of the pandemic, 57-year-old Lisa stabbed a 23-year-old woman to death out of pure jealousy. While a dramatic change in style is not atypical or negative per se, this alteration, in hindsight, of the fatal attack will prove to be a critical piece of evidence in showcasing the horrific physical and spiritual transformation that Lisa undergoes. Months before this tragic incident, Lisa requested a drastic hairstyle. Her typical long blonde hair transformed into a harshly colored, punk-like pompadour. In accordance, her body was decorated with colorful tattoos. Altars that resembled the Grim Reaper and dimly lit candles scoured her home. She worshipped and followed Santa Muerta, or Saint Death, a female saint originating from Mexico who was actually condemned by the Roman Catholic Church because she glorifies both death and hell. This new dark path was a stark contrast to her seemingly conservative lifestyle. From a fruitful career of being a paralegal for over 30 years to a seemingly good circle of family and friends, the truth was, Lisa felt that her current lifestyle was not what she was made for. She expressed a desire for a new life and a new purpose. She wanted to feel young again. Her mundane life was a complete juxtaposition to the adventurous, badass lifestyle she felt she aligned more with. She completely changed after she met a man by the name of Charles Beltran in 2018. Charles was a much younger man compared to her. He was 34 years old, and Lisa met him through her son, who worked at the Deep Alum Bar. Charles did not have a stable income, but his desire for making music and his tendency to be a ladies' man grabbed Lisa's attention. She became so infatuated by him. All she ever spoke about was Charles. The obsession gave in. Lisa was originally residing with her adult daughter Chelsea, and the two were really close to one another. But Lisa now viewed the presence of her daughter as an obstacle and roadblock in pursuing her new life. She subsequently kicked her daughter out of her house and allowed the grown man to move in, and even invested in his music career by creating a company for him and purchasing expensive equipment. She was basically his sugar mom, and it was a relationship that seemingly benefited both of them. He was getting resources from her, and she was getting a young guy to sleep with. Interestingly, the dynamic of the relationship was not exclusive. A third woman, 52 years old, Nina Morano, was involved in a three-way relationship with the two. After 3 failed marriages with men, Lisa eventually married Nina, who was also an established professional, working as a state attorney. My understanding is that Lisa never saw Nina as sexually attractive or ever genuinely loved her in a romantic way. The relationship between these two women was more so platonic, with financial benefits. Lisa even told people that she saw Nina as a doorway to getting everything she ever wanted. But both women made good money. Lisa, at the peak of career, actually testified in court that she and Nina made similar amounts of money, salary-wise. but it was Nina who was primarily documented as the one buying Lisa luxurious items, including a Maserati and even a facelift. Their financially driven relationship is further supported by the fact that the two even created a personal injury law firm together. Although Lisa introduced Nina to Charles and the throuple was clearly established, she could not bear Nina physically being with Charles. One day, she caught Nina and Charles in bed with one another, and she verbally expressed to her hairstylist that she wanted to kill Nina, but she had expressed zero contempt towards Charles. Their interaction upset Lisa so much, she demanded that Nina stop speaking to Charles altogether. Additional scenarios also seem to indicate that Lisa was not a quote-unquote girl's girl. She was reported to have forged child support papers to Charles's previous girlfriend, who he had a child with. And those papers stated that the girlfriend was to deliver her child to her and Charles's home and pay X amount of money. The documentation was signed by Lisa and Nina only, and Charles supposedly had no inclination that any of this was even occurring. When his former girlfriend confronted Lisa, Lisa resorted to cursing her out and even told her that she was jealous that Charles was living in her house. So Lisa was definitely exhibiting possessive qualities towards Charles. Her funding this younger man's career and babying him around was her way of keeping him close to her. Any woman that came between her and Charles was basically going to get it. Her insecurities were probably arising from her past of broken relationships with men and the fact that she was getting old. She was playing with fire, however, because Charles was a textbook ladies' man. He cheated on her all the time, and even in front of her. He had a way with getting women to like him, hence all the girlfriends he had in the past and all the women he currently played with. Basically, he had a track record of being a player, and Lisa was well aware of this. In addition to her house, she knew he also lived with other women. Lisa's possessive and jealous nature was tested for a final time in the early hours of October 5th, 2020, and this would also prove to be her ultimate breaking point. Charles, at the time, was out at a bar and doing what is typical of him, seeing other women. He came across 23-year-old Maricela Boteo, who was originally from Seattle, Washington, but was on a solo trip in Dallas, Texas. Like other early 20-year-olds, Maricela was out partying and just living it up. The two clearly vibed with one another, so much so that there was even video footage capturing the pair leaving the bar together. Basically, Charles invited Maricela back to his, aka Lisa's, house to sleep with her in the room. Although not atypical of him to bring other women around, this action of his will trigger the ultimate tipping point of Lisa in terms of her tolerance of him being with other females. Charles and Maricela slept in the same bed. At some point in the AMs, Charles was awakened by high-pitched screams and pleas for help from Maricela. A sight straight from a horror movie, Lisa was on top of Maricela and stabbing her repeatedly with a knife in a jealous rage. She apparently had such a strong grip on the young woman because when Charles apparently tried to intervene and push Lisa off of her, both women came tumbling down to the ground and Lisa was still latched on to Maricela. Ultimately, and unfortunately, 57-year-old Lisa prevailed in stabbing 23-year-old Maricela Botello to death. It was just the night before Maricela was supposed to return back to Seattle. With the dead body at the residence, Charles worried for his own tail. He did not want the murder to be pinned on him, and directly after the murder, he basically got his shit and left. Reportedly, he got high, went to another girlfriend's home, and even got an oil change. And as easily as that, Maricela was replaced just like every other woman Charles came across. She was simply just another body count in his mind, and instead of notifying the police of the brutal murder he had just witnessed at his bedside, of the person he laughed and interacted with and even slept with not so long ago, he attempted to just hide and move on with his life. Narcissistically, Charles believed that if he notified the police, they were going to pin the murder on him based on his extensive criminal past that included possession of firearms and violating probation. In an effort to distance himself as much as possible, Charles refused to help Lisa clean the crime scene and dispose of Maricela's body. He practically took all of his stuff and ran away in an attempt to physically disassociate from the situation as much as possible. So Lisa rang up her friend with financial benefits, Nina, and the two drove off together with the body into a wooded area miles away from the residence in the Dallas County. Once at the location, they basically just tossed Maricela's body on the ground. And then back at the residence, they cleaned out the bloodbath-like room enough to make it appear as if nothing tragic ever happened in there. A week after the savage and fatal attack, all 3 residents of the address abandoned the house and were on the run. Lisa, Nina, and Charles hopped from state to state. Those states were Louisiana, Pennsylvania, New York, Florida, Utah, and even country to country, Mexico, and in the case of Lisa and Nina, Korea and Cambodia. Obviously, murdering another human is no insignificant feat, and the consequences of the tragic action that took place were settling in quickly for all 3 of them. Unsurprisingly, the first person of interest in this entire case was Charles, because he was the last person seen walking with Maricela, based on the camera footage. The address of the house he took the young woman to was linked to Lisa and Nina. FBI agents actually initially phoned Lisa, who was the owner of the house, to inquire about Charles and wanted her to let him know that he is a person of interest regarding the missing person case. And at the time, Maricela was regarded as a missing person. Unbeknownst to them, they were directly speaking to the woman who savagely slaughtered the victim to death, hid her body, and cleaned up the crime scene. In the months of October and December, 2 search warrants were executed. The first time around, the house that Lisa, Nina, and Charles occupied appeared abandoned. The second time around, it was completely wiped out. Everything was empty in there. This is a key thing to note because Lisa previously renewed her lease on the house before the murder took place. So she was showing intention of still living there. For it to be completely empty now is highly unusual. Lisa was not the only one desperately trying to relocate. Nina requested her realtor neighbor to help her actually sell her Pennsylvania home as soon as possible. The Audi that Charles drove in to pick up Maricela was shipped into New York in a failed attempt to get sold. Even after the murder, Lisa was still desperate for Charles to stay with her. She paid for his travel expenses as he was jumping from place to place, and even his child support she paid off so that he can be with her. Although Lisa and Nina definitely did not seem to romantically like one another, the two acquaintances who have known one another for over a decade made the seemingly perfect partners in crime. They were also business savvy, so much so the two women relocated to Florida together and created an LLC for the sole purpose of not only obtaining money, but using that LLC as a means to apply for visas to Cambodia, under the guise that they are scouting artists for their business. Flash forward some months later, initial arrests were finally made. Nina was first. She was arrested at her Miami apartment. Upon seeing her crime buddy arrested, Lisa did what all loyal friends would do: save her own ass. She ran away from the apartment and Ubered herself to Orlando. She ran up inside a mall and bought a burner phone. In her short-lived time in Orlando, she even planned out how to quickly leave Florida and get access to Nina's money, since Nina was now going to jail. Using her cell phone data, police were able to catch up to her and eventually arrest her at her Orlando apartment. Last but not least, Charles was arrested in Utah. Upon arrest, both Nina and Lisa were able to post bail. They wasted no time. Strategically, they cut off their ankle monitors one by one in the early hours of Christmas morning back in 2021 at 7:28 a.m. and 7:32 a.m. respectively. Due to the holiday weekend, their offline ankle monitors were able to be missed for 2 entire days, and on December 27, 2021, a warrant was issued when they finally caught the issue. Lisa and Nina immediately flew from Dallas to Seoul, South Korea. From South Korea, they flew to Cambodia to, in Lisa's words, start a new life. They were eventually caught several months later when an ATM flagged unusual transactions, which prompted their second and final arrest in 2022 by the FBI. With her paralegal background, Lisa reportedly stared down the FBI agent and asked her, "What jurisdiction do you have here?" That same agent testified in court that Lisa's question shocked her. On the day Maricela disappeared, Lisa and Nina's cell phone data was reported to signal around the wooded area where Maricela's remains were eventually be found 6 months later. When testifying in court as to why her phone was in the area, Lisa claimed her presence there was a normal incident. She was supposedly just on her way to the FedEx distribution center, which was not unusual for her job. But the physical and circumstantial evidence is quite damning. Maricela's DNA inside Lisa's Dallas home, Lisa and Nina's phone pinging in the area where Maricela's body was found, and how the women sold their homes and started a business to flee the country to escape repercussions of Lisa's actions. Yeah, they definitely looked like the bad guys. Charles took the stand and testified against Lisa in a plea deal to uplift his murder charge. He basically stated that he and Nina had nothing to do with the actual murder of Maricela, and Lisa was the sole perpetrator of this act. Because of his testimony, the murder charges were eventually dropped for both Charles and Nina, leaving them with just charges on tampering with evidence. Now, Lisa was the main suspect in Maricela's death. Lisa, however, maintained her innocence and blamed the murder on Charles. The jury unanimously agreed that she is 100% guilty, and Lisa was eventually sentenced to life in prison for murdering Maricela Botello in addition to charges on tampering with her corpse, and she has to pay a total of $20,000. All three of these grown-ass adults let that deceased young woman remain a missing person for 6 whole months, knowing exactly what happened to her, knowing that she is a human being too, knowing that her loved ones are worried for her well-being. They treated her like she was nothing. Charles the coward just ran away from the situation instead of facing it head on and going to the police immediately with the crucial evidence he had. Lisa for being the haggard witch she worships and murdering that poor soul out of pure jealousy. Nina for participating with Lisa in disposing of Maricela's body and just letting her rot away in an empty, isolated field, miles away from those who actually cared and loved her. I think they were all just hoping that she never would be found and that she would just be forgotten. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on this case in the comment section below. I look forward to reading all of your thoughts. And please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more interesting content.